Okay, so now it's 1 minute past 3. So welcome everyone. On behalf of the Swedish Government Committee for Technological Innovation and Ethics, Climat, you're most welcome to our seminar today on regulatory experiments, design and evaluation. And we are very glad that this is a very timely subject. I don't know, some of you may have recognized that the Nobel Committee just a few days gave the Economy Prize for natural experimentation in policy design. So it's a current subject. And with us today, we have in Germany, Professor Dierk Bauknecht. He's Doctor of Energy Climate at the Öko-Institute and also at the University of Freiburg. So welcome, Dierk. We also have in Helsingborg, in south of Stockholm, we have Lisa Olsson, Head of Innovation and Transformation at the City of Helsingborg. Very much congratulations, Lisa. And also since you were awarded yesterday the prize of Innovation Leader in Sweden of the Year. So many congratulations for that. And finally, but not least, in Stockholm at the Ministry of Enterprise, we have Dr. Karl Westberg, who's researched economic history and focuses on innovation policy. Very much welcome, Karl, as well. And my name is Jon Simonsson. I'm chairperson of the Government Committee, Climat. And today we have participants from many countries. We're quite happy for that because we think knowledge exchange when it comes to regulatory development and experimentation is very, very much sought for. And to share experiences, share learnings, share failures is part of this. But especially to share knowledge about methodologies and how you communicate and how you set up experiments so that they will run off in a manner that is satisfying to everybody in a society. The background to this seminar is that Climat has proposed to the Swedish government to take measures to enable more of experimentation when it comes to policy and regulatory development. So the structure of the seminar is as follows. First, Dierk will tell us a bit about the background to the report, why methodology and regulatory experimentation is so important subjects, and what learnings there are for ministries and other public agencies. And after that, we will have Lisa to give her comments from a perspective of a very innovative and forward-looking Swedish city. And finally, Karl will reflect from a ministry and a researcher's perspective on experimentation as a tool for policy development. And then after that, everybody is free to join in the discussion. And you can do that either by raising your hand or you can write your questions in the chat. Emma Nilsson, who will moderate the chat, so you will be able to interact there. And don't forget, if you would like to post your question directly through speaking, we're very happy if you do that. So please turn off the microphone when you're not speaking. And as we stated in the beginning, this seminar is being recorded for later reuse of people that cannot join us today. So by that introduction, I would like to hand over to Dierk in Germany to give his background regarding the report. So over to you, Dierk.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I hope you can hear me and see the slides I have prepared. Thanks a lot for the invitation. Very exciting to share our experiences and our work here in this group. Yeah, design and evaluation of regulatory experiments. We've been working on that in various contexts. Just recently in a project, you can see the project partners here. Two of them are also here today. So we've just finished that. Now I hope I can change. Yeah. So regulatory experiments. Yeah. They are about learning. I think I don't have to explain that learning is important, that learning is also important in a regulatory context, in a policy context. So that's always important. You always have to learn from what you've been doing in the past and improve and to learn from also failure. And the thing about regulatory experiments here is really that you do that in a more explicit way, and you try and in the experiment deliberately deviate from the current policy framework or regulatory framework. When I talk about regulation here, I always mean a policy in a broader sense. So you do that deliberately here. You do not just learn from policy instruments that you have introduced and then evaluated, but you really set up a project for the experiment to test new rules, different rules in a real world setting before you then roll them out across the country or in a larger context. And in our work, I think that's important to mention at the beginning, we differentiate between two types of regulatory experiments. The one we call regulatory sandboxes, which has become quite a common term internationally, where the idea is, okay, you have some kind of social innovation, technical innovation, and you find that the regulatory framework that is in place inhibits these innovations from being tested. And then you say, okay, let's have an experimentation clause, some regulatory exemption so that these innovations can be tried out. So here the focus is not really about regulation, it's about exemptions from regulation to test other innovations. And the other type, which we have called regulatory innovation trial, which is, I would say, less common in practice than the regulatory sandboxes, at least so far. They really focus on new regulatory options. You really want to learn about the impact of new regulation before rolling it out. So I think this differentiation is important to mention at the beginning. Then what we have done, because I mean we can talk a lot about it, but we think it's an important instrument that can be used in practice by policymakers. We've developed this guide for public administrations. You can see the link here. It's really for public administrations in different contexts that want to organize an experiment. And the question is, okay, how can I do that? Which steps do I need to consider? What are the questions I need to ask myself? And I mean, there is no kind of standard approach for this, but there are several certain things you need to consider, that you need to think about, and we've tried to capture that in the report. And from this and other also personal experiences with regulatory experiments, I'm going to try and give you some insights. Yeah, we've done that in this research projects, which we have just finished, which was done for the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research in a program which was really aiming at developing new governance approaches for promoting innovation. So this was the context. And at the same time, in the German government, in the Ministry for Economic Affairs, there's also a lot of development in terms of testing developing real-world laboratories, as they call it. And they obviously also had an interest in this regulatory perspectives. There's a lot in the literature on experiments, arguing that experiments are important. For example, in sustainability transition literature, the whole sustainability issue relies a lot on experimental work, reflexive regulation. So there's a lot in the literature, which was one basis for us. But there's also an increasing number of real regulatory experiments where people have started to do that, but also ask themselves, okay, what do we need to consider? There's also in the smart grid community internationally, there's some work I'll show a link later on. And for me personally, there was also the experience with a program in Germany called Syntec, where I participated in a project where they introduced these sandboxes to test new solutions for the energy transformation. And this was kind of a bit, it was a bit, let's say, spontaneous. My experience from this is that there was no kind of learning framework. They just introduced these exemptions. And the result was that not so much was achieved from that compared to what could have achieved. So it's one example where I participated, where there was a lot of excitement. Oh, there's this experimentation clause. This allows us to do new things, test new solutions. But then in the end, there was also a lot of disappointment because it wasn't really well prepared. So in that sense, more could have been achieved. So design and methodology are important. That's certainly one learning from this. Experiments are about learning. And I think it's quite obvious that in order to achieve this learning, you need to set up the experiment in a way that enables this learning, maximizes learning. So in a very general way, you can say an open-minded attitude is important. Then a proper setup of the experiment at the beginning. So you cannot just do the experiment and then learn at the end, but you have to do that from the very beginning. Continuous monitoring throughout the experiment. So for example, in this example, I have just mentioned, we proposed a midterm evaluation to see how it is going, what needs to be adapted. Unfortunately, in this case, this didn't happen. And then obviously you need to evaluate the project in the end. And that includes, you know, how was the project as such going? What are the learning results? But also how can you then upscale the results to a larger context, which is not, you cannot take it one-to-one and then that's it, but you have to adapt it to a broader context. That's also a challenge. Then learning ideally requires testing new solutions, not simply an exemption from existing regulations. So this sandbox type that I have mentioned at the beginning is a bit difficult to learn for future regulation, because if you just exempt market participants or whoever, stakeholders, actors, if you just exempt them from existing regulation and say, okay, you are not covered by this regulation now, you can try out new things. Okay, that's nice, but then you cannot really learn for future regulation. You just learn how this exemption has worked out. So you shouldn't just exempt actors, but you should have an idea of what future regulation could actually look like and what kind of new option you want to try out. That's important, because also in this German example, I mentioned we had a lot of exemptions, but none of these exemptions had anything to do with the way we envisage future regulation in this energy domain. So for example, network regulation. So we couldn't really learn anything from that. And then the third point here is that I mentioned that already, you should design the experiment from the very beginning so that it can be then evaluated to answer your question. So for example, if you want to compare different regulatory options, you could do it this way or you could do it that way. You want to compare how this works out, then you need to set up the experiment, and that way you need to have one area or one group that is covered by option 1 and the other area covered by option 2. So otherwise you cannot compare in the end. Do you want to have a control group? So people that are not covered by any new regulation, where you can see then the difference. That's things you need to think about at the beginning and before you start setting up your project. Otherwise, if you think about this when you come to the evaluation phase, then it's obviously too late. Then the perspective of policymakers and regulators, as I've mentioned, I've had some experience with their perspective. So first of all, an active role of regulators cannot be taken for granted, as regulators are typically not used to experimenting. And our idea would be that, especially in the second type, that they do not just set up the experiment, but they may even be involved in the experiment. They may be one actor in the experiment, especially when you want to learn about, you know, how is a regulation implemented in practice? Well, how does that work? Then the regulator cannot just set up the experiment and sit back, but needs to get involved in this process. And that's not what regulators typically do to be part of an experiment. They want to regulate. Then we also often have seen concerns from regulators that, oh, an exemption or a new regulation, if that's tested in the experiment, that this preempts future regulation, that people then expect, okay, now that they are doing this experiment, I can expect that this will be the future regulation. And this is not what regulators want, because it's about learning, and it's could also be a failure. And you can say, okay, this didn't work out, or it didn't work out like that. We have to adapt it. So that's a bit of a risk that regulators see. And for this, as I've already mentioned, it can be useful to test alternative options so that you don't just have one, which then people expect to be implemented. And one potential result can be, and there should be, the option that it does not work and we'll have to do it differently. In the sandbox case, we have seen many examples where then the regulated company or other actors ask for an exemption. And there is, I mean, for regulated companies especially, it can be quite attractive to have such an exemption. You know, maybe they have a business that doesn't work for whatever reason, maybe because it's a bad business idea, or because the framework is not right. You don't know, and for regulators, it's okay. Why are these people asking for an exemption? Can they not develop a business plan that fits in this regulatory context? So these are concerns. So there are a number of concerns from the regulated side, but really the important point I would like to make here, especially for this regulatory innovation trial type, is that regulators can actually benefit and learn for future regulation. It's actually a tool for them. It's not a kind of an additional hassle where someone asks for an exemption and then the regulators has to go and organize this, and may then, okay, maybe this promotes innovation in the market, maybe nice, but still it's a hassle for regulators. They need to organize it. They need to coordinate this across departments. In our example, there was a lot of hassle with the European Commission to organize this. Okay, it's a hassle in a way, but really the point is that regulators, if it's set up properly, regulators can benefit from it and learn from it for future regulation. So it's a tool for them, really, and this is something that really needs to come across. In these guidelines that we have set up, just 2 slides on this. There is more on it in the report. Before you get started, we had this phase 1, which we have called clarification. So before you actually decide that you want to set up an experiment, first question is an experiment needed at all? I mean, it's a useful tool, an additional tool, but there are also cases where maybe it's not needed. And you may go for other instruments, modeling or whatever, or you may find that experimenting can also be a tool for delaying things. When you have a clear idea what you want to do, then and how it works, you don't need to experiment. So clarification of the goal of the experiment is obviously important. What kind of type of experiment do you want to go for? Is there uncertainty concerning the future system and its regulation? So it's not just this experiment, but you need to have an idea of where your sector, your system, your town, wherever you are, where this is going and how the experiment can fit into this context. And then you need to have a clear regulatory question so that the design of the experiment can then be geared to this question. That's the first phase, some initial question. And then once you have decided to go for an experiment, the second phase, which we have called preparation, embed an experiment in the broader context. So there may be other instruments that you're using, other tools where you evaluate your regulatory options. I've mentioned modeling, and you need to think about how this can be combined. Get political support, sufficient budget, and clarify legal issues is obviously important. I mean, experimenting, deviating from existing law somehow is tricky and needs a clear and proper legal basis. Otherwise, you will be likely to run into problems. Stakeholder involvement is important. It's not just the regulator and the regulated, but there are other stakeholders affected by new regulation. They need to be in the experiment somehow. How are they affected? And that should be properly organized, not just happening on the side. You need to decide on the size and duration of the project. Duration is a critical factor. If you stop too early, you cannot learn enough. If you go on forever, then it's not really an experiment anymore. You cannot scale up. Determine the concrete experimental project, prepare evaluation and learning. At this stage already, this is important. And this, I also wanted to mention, we've done a lot of work in the International Smart Grid Action Network. You find a lot of resources, policy messages, international experiences here if you want to check this out. And that's it from my side. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dierk, for a very interesting introduction. Just one question before we move on to Lisa and Karl. How has your work and report been received by ministries and other public agencies so far?
Yeah, I mean, we've had as part of this project, we've also had a number of workshops with a lot of participants and a lot of interest. I mean, in Germany, at least, it hasn't really led to new regulatory experiments, at least so far. But I mean, we published it only a few months ago. But But there's certainly, as you have mentioned at the beginning, there's increasing interest in the topic. And we are talking to the ministries about real-world laboratories that they could and should also include regulatory elements, which are a bit underdeveloped so far.
So thank you a lot, Dierk, and we will get back to you with more questions. So now over to the city of Helsingborg and Lisa. And Dierk, you can close down your PowerPoint now, so we give the chance to Lisa. So Lisa, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dierk, and I'm sure they will change their mind in Germany as well. Thank you for an excellent and truly incredibly important report that you have done. I completely share the conclusions and insights that the legislation and policy work also needs to work much more experimentally, just as other areas already do. I think that every area of the society needs to challenge existing ways of working from time to time for finding new and better ways. I like how you see it from both sides, both to test before setting a new legislation or policy, and that there are sandbox opportunities for us. In Helsingborg, we have a very strong focus on continuously challenging ourselves and finding new and better ways to solve our residents' needs, because we need to work radically differently to overcome our major societal challenges in, you could say, safety, quality of life, climate, integration, and so on. And we need to test those new solutions continuously in a controlled environment. And it's solutions that we actually don't know if they will work until we have tested them in real life. And we have been working for some time now to have an innovation culture within the municipality where it's okay to test, where you dare to test, it's okay to fail. And we have been working with an innovation structure that's actually quite the same methodology as you are proposing. It's about having an idea and then going forward and test it in a kind of a pilot, in a controlled environment, in small scale, to see if it flies or not, if it works, if it really gives us value. And if we can measure and see that it receives any value, then we should go further on and upscale it. Yeah, we have also been working with the capabilities, of course. So we have a process that works, we think. Unfortunately, we often find legislation to be an obstacle to our innovation work. And I think I should give you some example. I like to be concrete in my way of talking. So I can give you some example from areas where we are actually facing problems. And one thing that I would like to highlight is that within the corporate world, where I actually come from the beginning, and I think also within large nations as the US and China, they can benefit from technological development in a way that we can't, because we're lagging behind due to our laws. We would like to take advantage of the latest technology, and then we would need to find methods for the legislation to keep up and work faster. I have an example from today. We would like to use face recognition because we think that we could use it for lots of different safety solutions and for personalized learnings. And today, companies can use face recognition. As a civilian, I can use face recognition for several services every day. But in the public sector, it can only be used in the exercise of authority, which basically is from preventing crime, not from helping me and you in our daily life. So we need processes where we, in a limited environment, can apply for permission to deviate in order to prove whether the benefit can exceed the risk and really affect changes in the law. That also means that we need to open up, as you talked about, Dierk, and invite responsible people to be in that process. I can give another example, and that is when it comes to data. We have a lot of data about our residents, but we can't work with that data. We would like to use AI services and make predictions and make early efforts. But yeah, GDPR, it's about saving as little piece of data for as short time as possible. And AI needs lots of data that we can save for a longer period, so that it's a big conflict and we need to work around that. We also would like to share data between administrations. We have lots of families that meet different administrations within the city, and we can share data. We can't do so much good that we would like to. So we would like to use all the data we have, see new patterns, and come up with new solutions. I think I've listened to colleagues in Denmark and other parts of the world where they can do this, have this free card to test and try new ways of how they work and deliver on their mandates. And I believe this could be an exciting way forward for us as well. And I would just like to say that Helsingborg is ready to join, and we would love to be a testing municipality. So again, to be concrete on how we can move ahead, I think a controlled process where it would be possible for us to apply for exceptions from legislations or policies in a controlled environment. In doing so, we could really analyze effects and provide concrete basis for decisions on changes in legislation. So I think I will stop here, but I'm really, truly happy to be a part of the discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Just a short question. What do you think of the culture and leadership perspective in this, since doing experiment in public sector is not an easy task?
I think that it's crucial to have that kind of, what do you say, to have the political leaders and the leaders of the city behind you. They understand that we need to work radically different, and they support that. And that's crucial, because we couldn't have done all this experimentation if we didn't have that support. So that's crucial for the whole process, that they really truly understand why we need to work with innovation. If you don't understand why, then there's no way forward, I think.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Lisa. Thanks for your very important and real experiences. That's key for this discussion. So now we head over to the Ministry of Enterprise in Sweden and Karl Westberg. And please reflect about the discussion and what your experiences are in this subject.
Okay, thank you. And I really also want to thank you for this report. I think it's very interesting and very good. So it's very easy to talk about it. My reflections now, since my former work was as an academic in Stockholm University. I'm an economic history in my past, and now I work as I'm employed by the government. So I have to stand on two feet in this. But my reflections now is how the questions of regulation meet me every day, as everyone here at the ministry, in the daily work. So my reflection on my work here is that when it comes to change of regulation, it's mostly driven by the need of change. We have to change something, and then you have structures to do that. But the problem is that we don't really have any, as I see it, good tools for the opposite. And I think this is a very interesting problem, because the government is supposed to promote both stability and change at the same time. And how do you do that? It's very difficult. And the government must handle both this dimension at the same time. So my impression here is that each regulatory challenge is handled individually, and we have ways to do that. But there's not a sufficient standard of practice when you try to do the other way around. When you have political wish for experimentations, you don't really have the tools for that. So it goes back to the need to change argument. And so, and we know that we need systematic, safe, and transparent tools to work with regulatory experimentations. And we also know to get acceptance to experiment with is a very sensitive word here. But anyway, if you want to have acceptance for it, it has to be legal, as you noted, as you said. And also that it must be possible for the public eye to examine and challenge the experimentations to win support for this way to work. So to do that, I think we have to have some kind of a common tool which we can agree on. This is a way to do it. So we talk about the same thing. And when I read this report, I thought it was very good, because this is a tool that we could use. And I really appreciate that the model that is presented here is not too complicated. And I don't think that is bad. I think that is good, because if it's not too complicated, we could use it. So I think that is a very good thing about the report. And the other thing that I also do appreciate with the report is that it highlights the importance of the learning process. And as we all know, if you want to learn something, you have to organize the learning. You can't just learn by random. You have to have some structure for the learning. And I think that this tool is a good tool to have this learning process. So I really do appreciate it. I could talk a lot about more things about the evaluation and so on, and I guess we get back to that. But my general saying here is that I really do appreciate this report, and I think it could be used. So I would like to say thank you.
Okay, thank you, Karl. One small question to you. When you work in a political context and you bring up the subject of experimentation, what reactions do you get, do you think?
I think I get, everybody knows that we have to experiment. It's not strange thinking. But at the same time, we have to be very careful, because you can't experiment with the common agenda as you please. You have to have it. It must be legal. It must be transparent. It must be possible for everyone to have a stake in this one. So I would say that everybody likes, maybe I'm overdoing it. Everybody sees the need for it, but we don't, as this is my view, I think we lack tools to do this, so it could be systematic and safe. And that's the big advantage with this report, I think.
Methodologies and also communication around experimentation is very, very vital.
Yes.
So I have a few questions for you, all the three of you now, and I also would like to encourage the audience. Please write your name in the chat or raise your hand if you would like to pose a question to Lisa, Karl, or Dierk. But I have one thing as to start out with. One aspect of experimentation is this around so-called failures and the risk. And public sector is by nature very risk averse and also needs to be very, very careful about things. So how do we make it safe and attractive for public agencies and ministers, along with civil servants, to engage in experimentation under real life settings? So I thought I start with you, Lisa, and then Dierk, because Lisa, you have done this in your city. So please, what are your reflections regarding this?
I think one crucial thing is to, as I said before, get everyone to understand why this is important, and then you need to earmark money. I mean, you actually need to earmark risk money, and that's what we have done here in Helsingborg. We have innovation money, and been very frank from the start that we will fail with lots of those tests, and that's okay, because the benefits of those who will succeed will be bigger than what we have put in, so to speak. So I think, yeah, to have to really get people to understand why you need to do this and actually have earmarked money, risk money.
Yeah. And Dierk, have you reflected about this with safety and attractiveness for public servants to engage?
Yeah, the point, I mean, failure sounds really not so attractive, but I mean, the point is that you can learn a lot from such experiments as well, especially if they are set up in a proper way. And I mean, failure, if you just look, I mean, there is failure that the experiment just didn't work. Okay, that's then bad. But if it's failure in the sense that the instrument I wanted to test or whatever I wanted to test didn't work out in the way that I expected it to work out, that allows you then to adapt the instrument. So then that's exactly what you wanted to get out of the experiment. So in that sense, I think it's important to talk about failure as in, that this can also happen, to make people realize that, this can happen. At the same time, I think failure is maybe not the right word, because you can still get something out. I mean, at the end of the day, you always have to adapt what you have done in the experiment when you want to then upscale it. You have to adapt it, and even the failure situation tells you how you may need to do that.
Thanks, Dick. When media, if the people of you that have worked in the political context, sooner or later media will come along and look at an experiment. We have the auditor generals, we have the politics discussions in parliaments themselves. So there are a lot of challenges around this. So how to systematically handle the learnings, or a political opponent would say failure, somehow we have to address that question. One more question before we let the audience in. The Nobel Committee, as I mentioned, and also the Swedish research body, ESO, has recently lifted the importance of experimentations. And what should governments know to enable experimentation? Karl, what do you think? How should we create this knowledge within the public agencies to come here and develop and engage?
It's very hard to answer that, but I would say that everything starts with the learning process, and that you can build knowledge about this. And I think connected to the question before, that the failures should be seen as a part of the learning process, and so you can handle them inside some kind of structure. And this model, I would say, as we talk today, I think that is the way to learn about this, because this is a new field for very many of us, and especially for the governments and so on. So you have to have some kind of structure for deposit all the knowledge and the failures and the successes and so on. I think that is the way. I don't know if I answered your question, but that came to my mind.
Okay, thanks, Karl. And now I see that Leonie, you have put the question. Please turn on your microphone, introduce yourself, and post your question.
Sure. Thank you very much, Jon. Thank you very much also to all the speakers for your very interesting inputs. I'm a project manager for Konrad Adenauer Foundation here in Stockholm, and I'm investigating innovation for sustainable development in the Nordics, which is why this topic is very interesting to me in my research. And I would be interested if you can think of any already existing successful examples of regulatory experiments. And you mentioned a topic of being successful or not, but I mean successful in the sense of that the regulation or a specific regulation has been adapted as a result of this experiment.
So should we start with Dierk? Would you like to take the question to start with? And then Lisa and Karl.
Yeah, in our project that I mentioned, I mean, we looked at a range of different examples across countries, across sectors. In the electricity sector, we see a lot of sandbox type experiments so far, but that's changing. So it's not a regulatory experiment in the sense that I presented it, but certainly Ofgem in the UK is moving from the sandbox approach to a more what can we learn from regulation for regulation approach. So that's an interesting example where things are changing. They have a lot of a long track record of sandboxing and are now taking it one step further, if you like. And in these case studies that we've looked at, we looked at several cases of basic income experiments. And I mean, this is certainly a new type of regulation, if you like, and where people also learned for how to do this on a larger scale.
Thank you, Dirk. Lisa, do you have any reflections to Leonie's question?
Yeah, I have been inspired from Denmark. They have been trying something called frikommuner, where municipalities can go together and apply to deviate from current regulations and in order to find new solutions that can give very useful insights back and then change the regulations. So there is an example of where I can see from a distance has been working and very inspiring to hear about. I would also like to reflect on the previous topic in saying that I think transparency is the key to succeed when it comes to all of our innovation work. We are totally transparent about, you could call it failures or you can call it learnings, but I think it's truly important to be transparent about it. So we post everything that we do, both the things that have had success and those that where we just have learnings, so to speak. So transparency within this field, I think is truly important.
Thank you, Lisa. Karl, do you have an example you would like to share?
I would like to say something, but I thought about this Finansinspektionens case. Maybe you can mention that because I think you know it better than me, Jon. But I would like to say one thing before, because when I read this model, which I like very much, one question that I thought about is sometimes it's just that the regulatory conditions are unclear. Sometimes it's not that it's actually a regulatory obstacle. Maybe sometimes it's just like we don't find our way in this. And I think that also belongs to this kind of experimentations. So sometimes you find that it's not a regulatory obstacle, it's maybe our, tillämpning, the application of we do it differently. And I think that the case about Finansinspektionen, is it okay if you mention it, Jon? Because you know it better than me.
Okay. We have
I think that is a good case.
We have the Financial Conduct Authority in Sweden, and the Director General is actually also part of the Climat committee. And the Swedish government wanted the growing fintech sector in Sweden to cooperate a bit more closely with the Financial Conduct Authority. But the authority then, of course, felt very reluctant, thought that this was a very difficult process to interact with specific financial companies. So then we brought in the Innovation Agency in Sweden that facilitated roundtable discussions with some 70 or 80 different financial companies and the agency, where the agency was one among the people sitting around the round table. And by having that interaction, the understanding from the financial companies for how the regulatory authority work increased from some 30-40% up to 70-80%. So it was a completely much more solid understanding in the financial community for how you should think about regulatory issues. And as a consequence of that, also the Financial Conduct Authority decided to have a small group which has the assignment to have the hands out in the market and interact with the different companies that want to build new financial business models, for example. And another example in Sweden, which has been worked with, is when for young delinquencies, young criminals, and when they get charged for crime, it might take many months, sometimes up to a year, and it's a very long part of their life to wait for a court decision for almost a year. So then we did an experiment in a few municipalities with 5 of the authorities involved in prosecuting young people. And they collaborated with new ways and came up with, as a trial in reality, and came up with a new joint work way that is then now implemented and expanded to several municipalities. So that are two examples. There are other examples as well. So Emma, do we have any questions from the audience, or should I have some questions? Otherwise, you can shake or go on. Okay. One thing I was thinking about is for this particular civil servant, and also for a director general. What do you think? Do we need to create incentives for them to start experimenting, since this is such a challenging and sometimes perceived dangerous activity? So Lisa, from your perspective, what do you think? Or is it enough to have a very innovative leader at the top?
It's a really good question, and I think some sort of sense of urgency is always needed. I can see that within the municipality, within the administrations that have a really true sense of urgency, they are also better at innovation. When they have a true need of working quite differently to overcome challenges, and when they have a real purpose for it, then they are also better at it. So I think it is important to have a kind of sense of urgency approach to it. And I think we have so many examples of that sense of urgency. So it shouldn't be a problem, but that's just my point of view.
Thank you. Dierk, do you have any reflection about that?
Yeah, incentive sounds good. I don't know what this could actually be. I mean, the first step would certainly be to remove disincentives. And from my experience, I mean, it's often the legal unclarity, and that you have to kind of start this on a case-by-case basis. And that's a very strong disincentive. And then also other civil servants from other departments may not like you anymore, because it's very difficult. So doing an experiment is an experiment as such, and it should be more kind of become more mainstream to do that. And there should be clear legal rules. There should be also the resources available somewhere, maybe concentrated somewhere. For example, the German economic department, they have a real world laboratory agency now, which is kind of in charge of organizing this. So if you want to do something, or ideally if you want to do something somewhere in the department, you don't have to start from scratch and kind of think about it yourself, but there is someone that already is well connected, has all the knowledge, and knows how to do that, and knows how to do it legally as well.
Okay, thank you. I had an interaction some time ago, a year ago, I think it was, with the Canadian government offices, and I understood that they evaluate director generals based if they dare to experiment. I don't know if we have somebody from Canada with us, but please, if you have, please raise your hand and give a comment on how you work with experimentation, because I think there's a lot of interesting things happening on government level in Canada when it comes to these matters. Any other questions? Let's see there. I have some more. If not, when I've been looking at different companies, how they work with experimentation, one company said that yes, somebody raised your hand. Please turn on your microphone and camera and you speak.
Hi there, my name is Catherine McGregor. I'm actually from the Canadian government with our Treasury Board. I'm part of the Government of Canada experimentation team. So I can tell you a little bit about what we're doing. We have a few different bodies in Canada working on this question. We also have a Centre of Regulatory Innovation at our Treasury Board. Our team specifically is working to match expertise on experiments. So we have a matching process where departments can apply for questions they have about running experiments and any stage in the process, whether that's analysis or just choosing a design, and they're matched with other experts across the Government of Canada. So we're really playing that connector role, and then also acting as a learning hub for resources on experiments more generally, not focused necessarily on technology, but the full gamut of experiments, RCTs, pre-post test designs, or the A/B testing more on the digital front as well. So definitely working on this, and would be interested in connecting as well further from the Canadian side.
Thanks, excellent example, and thanks for your inspiring work in Canada. Another example, I don't know if we have any colleague with us from Estonia, but that I was told by an Estonian public servant is what that they had problems with speeding in the roads in Estonia, and it didn't help to raise the fine level. So then they decided to do an experiment. Instead of giving people fines when they got a speeding ticket, they forced people to stay on the roadside for 45 minutes as a fine. so they could choose, do you want to pay the fine or do you want to sit here for 45 minutes? And then they did the evaluation afterwards. And that was a very courageous project, I think, to change how you work with speeding problems in a country. So there are many interesting examples in different countries. One other example and thought I have that I've been inspired by Finland and the conductor, the Auditor General in Finland, is how you should think about auditing and follow-up of experiments from a more public sector perspective. And I think maybe Dierk or Karl, maybe you could say a few words what you think about the formal evaluations that the government does when it comes to also then evaluating experiments. One comment before that is that when we had the Nobel laureates 2 years ago, I was listening to one of the seminars and they said that you have to have a systematic view, a portfolio view on experimentation. So over to you, Dierk. What do you think about the more formal evaluation that an audit in government has to execute sooner or later when it comes to experimentation?
Okay, I don't have a lot of experience with that, but I mean, first of all, there's the audit or the evaluation of the. I mean, there are two levels. One is what came actually out of the experiment. What are the learnings from the experiment, and the other level, and that's probably more the audit level. How did the experiments work? How was it set up? Was it set up in a proper way, and was it set up so that it could actually achieve the results it should have achieved? Yeah, I mean, I haven't really seen an evaluation, a proper evaluation of an experiment in that sense, really. But it's obviously also important not just to evaluate how the regulatory instrument has worked, but also how the experiment was set up, so that you can then also next time when you do the next experiment also improve in that respect.
Yeah. Thanks, Dierk. Lisa, do you have any experiences when it comes to these more formal evaluations and how they relate to experiments?
We actually, I mean, we follow up on every experiment or innovation pilot or whatever we call it. So we have a portfolio management in place, and if that's what you mean, and we follow up, and we have also put in KPIs in our regular financial report, and I think we are the only one who does that. So when you read the financial report from the city of Helsingborg, we also follow up on our innovation work and the effects, and have different KPIs for that. So I think it's important to follow and have it within the normal business.
Yes. Karl, have you thought anything about this more formal evaluation that is always executed by governments or by the parliament when it comes to these types of initiatives?
Yes, as in this report, we talked about this randomized control groups way of doing it. And I think that is a good way in one way. But at the same time, many of these experiments, if you work with that kind of method to evaluate, you have to have some quantity to relate. The control group has to be quite big so you can say something. And many of these, as I suspect, these experimentations are quite unique. You try to do something special. So sometimes you have to be less, thorough in the control group argument, and somebody don't like it. But the thing is that when you try to evaluate, especially innovation projects, you could never really foresee the results from the beginning. I mean, that's a complication with innovation. So you have to be very careful when you start up something and say, this is what we hope to reach or something. And then you have to decide what data is necessary to actually to show this wish where I'm supposed to go. And then you have to accept, some kind of this is enough data to actually say that it seems that we are going in the right way. I don't think many like that way, that approach with evaluation, because today everybody is talking about the evidence-based, and it sounds very nice with the evidence-based, but the politics can't manage to keep that carefulness, because the tempo of the politics is so much faster. So you have to have ways to good ways to actually say that this is enough information to say if we are going in the right direction and so on. And I think that is very important. So that is my reflections about this. And I thought about, when I read the report, that maybe that is a part of the evaluation part of the model that could be more pragmatic, I think.
So by that, thank you, Lisa. By that, we're reaching the end of our very interesting discussion. First of all, I would like to thank Dierk and all your colleagues for taking this very good initiative to write this report. That is extremely timely and extremely useful from the Swedish perspective, but I also think for many other countries' perspective. And I would like to thank Lisa for very inspiring work in Helsingborg, and also for your very, very good examples and concrete thoughts about how this could be accomplished. And also Karl, reflecting from a government perspective that is not always so easy to do. So thank you, all three of you. We will now, after the seminar, forward a short follow-up questions, and the ones of you that have joined in, we would be very happy if you could answer those 2 questions, because we think this matter is very much a living subject, and we need to collect learnings, and we also need to identify further ways forward to make this subject even more on the political and the public agenda. So please feel free to fill in that report. And if you would like to, you're very much welcome to get in contact with me or any of my colleagues at Climat to pose questions, or if you like to interact in any other form or share knowledge or whatever you would like to. So please contact us if you have an interest. And by that, we conclude today's seminar, and I would like to thank you, and we're very happy that so many found an interest in this, we think, very, very interesting and crucial subject, so that we can develop in a safe and ethical way. So thank you all, and I hope you will fill in good answers in our small survey. So thank you for today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.